So, this is the end of Deuteronomy. We're up to Deuteronomy chapter 34, and we'll realize in this particular chapter that you could carry something for years and years and years and years and realize that you may never actually step into the thing that you hoped for, right? So, the faithful service of Moses that we'll see in this chapter doesn't actually end in personal arrival, but it always ends in God's faithfulness, right? In Deuteronomy chapter 34, we're going to actually stand with Moses on Mount Nebo, see the land, the promised land from afar, and watch the story hand over to Joshua, right? And at the end of this chapter, I'll give you an immediate action to help you finish well, even when you do not get everything that you wanted in this episode of Biblical Unlocks. This show is designed to help build your habit of reading the Bible, understanding the Bible, and applying it in your daily life. If you enjoy episodes like this, please consider following and rating the show. It's free, it helps you out a lot, and you can always change your mind later. Otherwise, let's get some context into the chapter. Okay, so Deuteronomy chapter 34. This is closing the entire Torah, the Pentateuch. So we've been reading since Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. This is the 5 books of the Torah, the Mosaic books, which are written by Moses. Now, we're going to end this entire series of books, these 5 books, with this final chapter. And it's going to finish with Moses viewing the promised land from Nebo, and he's going to die there under God's care, and Joshua is going to take up leadership. And the chapter is actually going to praise Moses as the unparalleled servant of the Lord whose signs, power, and closeness to God actually shaped Israel's life. It does not end with triumph, but with reverence, right? The servant dies, the people mourn, but the story continues under God's promise. Okay, let's read verses 1 to 4. And the focus here is going to be Moses is going to see the land from Nebo. And my question for you is, why would God show Moses the land but not let him enter it? Verse 1, Then Moses went up from the plains of Moab to Mount Nebo, to the top of Pisgah, which is opposite Jericho. And the Lord showed him the whole land, Gilead as far as Dan, all Naphtali, the land of Ephraim, and Manasseh, all the land of Judah as far as the western sea, the Negeb, and the plain, that is the valley of Jericho, and the city of palm trees as far as Zoar. The Lord said to him, This is the land of which I swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, saying, I will give it to your descendants. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you shall not cross over there. Okay, biblical unlock number 1. Why let Moses see the land even if he cannot enter it? Why? Because vision matters more, and it matters even when the arrival is denied. God lets Moses see the fulfillment of the promise, so he knows the journey was not wasted. And the chapter teaches that God's promises are real even when the servant does not personally complete every stage. Moses' gaze, right, he looks at the promised land. What does this symbolize? It symbolizes a final act of trust. He sees enough to rest in God's faithfulness, and he trusts God enough to know that maybe God's plan is not that he can see the promised land because of his past actions. So your longing, your desire for something, that is a part of the pilgrimage journey. The faithful individuals may actually see the promise before they possess it. And here, the end of a calling is not the same as failure. These are not synonymous terms. And that's what we need to remember here, that sometimes what you expect is very different to how God will enact his greater purposes. Okay, let's read verses 5 to 8 now. Focus here is going to be Moses' death, burial, and mourning. And why does Scripture spend time on Moses' burial and the people's grief? Let's read. Verse 5, Then Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab. At the Lord's command, he buried him in a valley in the land of Moab, opposite Beth Peor, but no one knows his burial place to this day. Moses was 120 years old when he died. His sight was unimpaired, and his vigor had not abated. The Israelites wept for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days. Then the period of mourning for Moses was ended. Okay, so why does the chapter pause to say Moses died, was buried, and was mourned? I think it's because the death of a servant of God, that matters, right? The burial is mysterious, but the emphasis is quite clear. God receives his faithful servant, and Israel must mourn honestly before moving on. And the death of Moses marks the end of an era, but not the end of God's work. And grief is a part of that faithful transition. This is not demonizing grief. This is not saying, well, I know he's going to go to heaven, so why should I care where he is? No, it is a faithful transition. And mourning is a holy acknowledgement of love and loss. It's not unbelief. It's recognizing that what we had is done now, but we will pick it up again later. And I'm sad that it's over now, but we will again meet, and we will have that love again. Okay, so let's read verse 9 now. Verse 9, the focus is Joshua is going to be filled with the spirit of wisdom. And my engagement question for you to stay focused is, what does faithful transition look like when one leader ends and another begins? Verse 9, Joshua son of Nun was full of the spirit of wisdom because Moses had laid his hands on him, and the Israelites obeyed him, doing as the Lord had commanded Moses. Okay, so how does leadership continue after Moses? It's not by replacing Moses' uniqueness, right? But by receiving God's equipping for the next task. Joshua, he's not Moses, and Moses is not Joshua. He becomes Joshua, right? And he is filled with wisdom because God appoints him. The transfer is public and grounded in the laying on of hands, and it's sustained by obedience. What I see here is that true office, true submission, true leadership always has divine tethering, right? It requires divine gifts. It's not your ambition, right? Successes depends on God's enabling, not on just your personality, your hard work, your determination, your perseverance. Whilst these things are important characteristics to have, God allows things to happen. And when you align your will with God's will, then all of a sudden you start to think, you know what, I don't care what I want. I want what you want. Whether or not I like what this implies, I'm going to follow you, radically trust you, because I know that by trusting you, I can focus on your vocation. And you care about me, you love me so much that you died for me, and therefore I'm going to continue in the same way. Again, the Lord had commanded Moses, right? That you're doing as the Lord commanded Moses, and Joshua of Nun was full of the spirit of wisdom because Moses had laid his hands on him. So that is what we're seeing here, the transmission of power. Okay, let's read verses 10 to 12 now. This is going to be focused on the unmatched status of Moses, right? So why does the chapter end by saying no prophet like Moses ever arose again? Never since has there arisen a prophet in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. Verse 11, he was unequaled for all the signs and wonders that the Lord sent him to perform in the land of Egypt against Pharaoh and all his servants and his entire land, and for all the mighty deeds and all the terrifying displays of power that Moses performed in the sight of all Israel. Final biblical unlock for the book of Deuteronomy. Why do we end by saying that no prophet has arisen like Moses? Because Moses' uniqueness sets up expectation. He knew God face to face. He mediated signs and wonders and led Israel with unmatched intimacy, unequaled authority. And the chapter closes by honoring him without pretending that any human servant is ultimate. The one who led them this far is honored, but the Lord alone is God. So he is a great type of spiritual ascent, right? But Moses, points beyond himself. We need to show and we need to see that Moses is actually great because he points onward, forwards to God. He's like a 45-degree mirror. You look at him and then your head points upwards, right? It's like light that shines up and you see the Lord. And we should never, ever get into the habit of suggesting that Moses is God-like or anything like that. He's a prophet of God, which is important because Moses, he performed all these things in the sight of all Israel, but he always went back to who the Lord is, where he got this ability from, and that the Lord is the ultimate provider of everything here. All right, let's take a look and see how this particular chapter, Deuteronomy 34, fulfills Jesus Christ. So, Deuteronomy chapter 34 ends the story of Moses by showing both his greatness. We saw the works that he did. We saw how he's a prophet of God and has been unequaled. He's been unmatched in all of Israel, but also his limits. He is mortal. He dies. He bleeds. And he is buried. And in Christ, this pattern is not only fulfilled, but it is surpassed, because Jesus is the greater leader who not only sees the promise, but brings his people all the way into it. Moses dies outside the land, but Christ dies, rises, and opens the way into the new inheritance. Moses hands off the mission to Joshua, but Christ remains the living Lord of the mission forever. What Moses could only point towards, Jesus actually secures. That is, the true inheritance. He dies and he rises and he opens the way into it. And he is the living Lord of the mission forever. Moses points towards, Joshua's also going to point towards, but only Jesus secures this mission. As we read in Hebrews chapter 3, verse 5 to 6. Now Moses was faithful in all God's house as a servant to testify to the things that would be spoken later. Christ, however, was faithful over God's house as a son, and we are his house if we hold firm the boldness and the pride inspired by hope. So, what do we see here? Moses' final chapter is actually a Christian hope. That is, the servant was faithful, Moses was faithful, but the son brings us home. Alright, let's see how we can apply this chapter in our everyday lives. So, I think it's important to recognize, pray, Lord, help me finish faithfully, even if I don't see everything I hope for. Moses probably wanted to go into the promised land. He could have probably said, you know what, I've went all this way, 40 years, I brought them out of Egypt, I was doing all of these things, why can't I see the promised land? But at the end he said, I'm satisfied, it doesn't matter. I know that I'm following your plan, regardless if it's not what I want. And the second thing is, be grateful for that which you have before it is gone. Moses died, and I don't think the Israelites truly realized what a servant of God they had in their midst. So be grateful for the people around you who are guiding you, leading you, forming you spiritually before they are gone. So in the final chapter of Deuteronomy, we see that Moses sees the promised land, but he is unable to enter it, and that shows that his faithfulness is not measured by any personal arrival. And what's interesting is that his death, burial, and mourning, they're treated as holy and important. And Joshua's wisdom, it comes from God's Spirit, showing that the transition is actually sustained by divine appointment, and that Moses is unmatched as a prophet, and yet still is a servant who points beyond himself. God is transcendent. He transcends the finite lives of his servants. And the chapter ends the Torah, which is the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, with reverence, grief, and hope, because the story continues because God continues. Alright, well that's it for this episode of Biblical Unlocks. Next time, we're going to move from the close of Moses' story, as we saw, to the beginning of Joshua's story in Joshua chapter 1. So we'll unpack courage, obedience, and how God speaks to a new generation after loss. You don't want to miss it. So, if you enjoyed this episode, please feel free to rate the show and follow. It's free, it helps me out a lot, and you can always change your mind later. Otherwise, just have a blessed day. And remember, if you're not in your word, you're in your feelings. Godspeed.